Michaela Vernava, joined on the line by Belch, CEO of STRIVR Labs. Derek, really excited to talk with you about your technology today. You were showing off this technology, I know, down at South by Southwest along with Gatorade last month. Can we start with you just explaining what this technology is?
Sure, yeah. So at STRIVR, what we're doing at a very basic level is using virtual reality to improve human performance. Obviously, a lot of the work we've done for the last 2 years has been focused on sports, using VR to help athletes get mental reps off the field when they can't actually be on the field. As I'm sure you know, being in the sports world, there are rules around how long you're allowed to be on the practice field in the NFL and college football. There's also the body not being able to physically take a ton of time on the field again and again and again. So how can we give athletes a mental rep that is so valuable, in addition to a physical rep, sometimes even more valuable? So that's what we're doing at the most basic level. With Gatorade specifically at South by, we were part of a consumer fan activation for them, and we created a little VR experience, and that kind of turned into an experiment, which was kind of cool, where we put one half of the 711 person sample size through traditional two-dimensional film watching and one half through virtual reality based watching to teach them the concept of the zone read. And then we tested them, both groups, in VR to see how they did relative to one another. And the results were pretty interesting, to say the least.
I found it very interesting when I was watching some of the videos that are up on your website, the 360-degree angle that you're able to project of a team's practice footage. So rather than when they go back to the film room, rather than looking at the all 22 or different angles like that, you're actually getting a 360-degree view. How do you guys get that footage?
Yeah, so certainly some things we will leave up to the imagination, but for the most part, we've come up with a way to film practice from a stationary vantage point, kind of moving a tripod and a camera around the field where it's not in the way of the players. Sometimes we can get really live, organic footage. Other times it has to be a little more scripted and a little more of kind of a walkthrough, and you're building your library specifically. And then we've come up with all of the workflow tools to turn it around really quickly. How does it feed into the software? How does that software tell you whether or not players are learning, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of our workflow and what we're actually doing. I think the key here to note is, like you said, Michaela, it's real. It's real video. It's not video game caricatures that the science has proven don't work cognitively, because when we watch a human being move, especially an athlete, at a really fast speed, and even the best graphics right now, like, they just don't move like real people. And the effect of that is your brain completely tunes out. So we want to engage your brain, and thus, 3 years ago when we started this, we were doing it with real video, and that's where we still are today, and we're trying to make it better and better all the time.
So certainly better than animation, as you say, but also better than the traditional film. Why? Why is this vantage point so much better in creating muscle memory and getting those mental reps?
Sure. Well, so number one, there is actual research, and when I studied VR at Stanford when I was developing the product while coaching there, there's actually a lot of research on the effectiveness of VR relative to traditional 2D methods. They have some really esoteric studies looking at Tai Chi and how can we, watching and studying in VR the Tai Chi moves relative to just watching them in 2 dimensions flat. My performance is 37% more effective when I train in VR, for example. And then there's some really, really specific things that are related to recycling and the effects of VR on your brain when you chop down a tree versus when you read something in 2 dimensions. So there's real research behind this. It is not a stretch to say that studying from a first-person vantage point, from the view you actually have on the field as an athlete, will be more effective than, to your point, the all 22. Because when you play, you don't see all 22 players at one time from 50 feet in the air. So at the most fundamental level, we're giving them a first-person vantage point of what they actually see on the field, or pretty close to it. We're kind of limited by the laws of physics with certain things. So, really, really surface level, like, it's a better view, plain and simple. Now, it's not for everybody. I'm not going to say that every player in the NFL or in college football says, yeah, I want that, and I don't want to ever watch film again. That's not where we are yet. We're still in the early adopter phase. But it's very, very real. The feedback is tremendous. And then from a does this actually work vantage point, jury's still out to a certain extent. Our South by Southwest data with regular people was really, really impactful and really positive as it relates to the effects of VR. We have a ton of proprietary data with the NFL teams and the college teams we work with that I can't talk about specifically, but we have some really, really interesting correlational data where quarterback A watched, blitz 19 times the day before the game. It showed up in the game, completion. Now, are we the reason for that? I don't know, right? But we're starting to gather this type of data that is going to eventually make it so people can't argue with the effectiveness as to what we're doing.
So this technology is being used at the collegiate level and also with pro teams, and I know not just in the NFL, NHL teams, NBA teams. What is the future? Do you think that every NFL team and all pro sports teams will adopt this technology at some point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And obviously my job as the CEO of STRIVR and kind of this face of the VR industry, in sports, I'm supposed to say everyone's going to have this in a year. Truthfully, over the last 2 years, we've worked with 7 teams in the NFL, 15 teams in college, 3 NBA teams, 2 NHL teams, 1 baseball team. We work with the U.S. ski team. We're still in early adopter mode. Like I said, we have some really, really high impact data. We get really good subjective feedback. I see a day in 5 years where everyone in football is doing this, but I also see a day where only half of football embraces it, or other sports, for example, because change is hard. This stuff takes time. It takes money. It takes a different way of thinking, and not everybody's on board with that, right? It's no different than that piece of that stretching band in the weight room. Why doesn't every team have every single piece of equipment in a weight room that's the same? Because people have different preferences. So, we're just one piece of the puzzle that teams are choosing to kind of build out their holistic training platform, physical, mental, emotional. Again, I hope we get to the point where we're working with everybody, but especially in the sports where there's a lot of movement, soccer, hockey, basketball, VR is just not ready for prime time yet. There's some really cool, isolated use cases. We're doing those with our forward-thinking partners, but it's not quite ready for the masses. Well, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, it does. It is NFL draft week. So I'm curious, we see teams whiff on draft picks a lot of times. It's hard to know how a player will translate from college football into the NFL. How can this technology be used to evaluate players prior to draft day?
A great question. And a couple of our teams, and I'm not allowed to say who they are, have put draft prospects through VR simulations as opposed to or in addition to the chalkboard and the film study. They literally drop them into that vantage point of being on the practice field, and they see how they respond, right? Really, really powerful stuff, really cool, really, really interesting way to evaluate somebody. That is only going to continue to grow as we get out there more and more within the NFL.
Can I ask a hypothetical? So when you say they're able to drop them out in the practice field, is it, so hypothetically say the Dallas Cowboys are looking to draft a cornerback, are they able to simulate Dak Prescott on the practice field, see if they can get an interception against an NFL quarterback?
Yeah, so unfortunately not that intricate yet. We're not having anybody put pads on or run around with a VR headset on where they're making an interception. It's more about the mental decision making that goes into grasping concepts, your reaction time to certain things, etc. So yeah, we have some content with some of our teams where you could put a defensive back right in front of a wide receiver and you could see how he reacts when that receiver comes off the ball. Or more importantly, because they're going to do a lot of that stuff on the field anyway, you don't need a virtual simulation for truly physical things that they're evaluating. More importantly, you put the player, whether it's a corner, a linebacker, a quarterback, obviously quarterback is the most high impact position when it comes to decision making, but you put them in the VR simulation and you just start rapid fire going through all of the mental things associated with this coverage and this call and this play, and all right, it's a 2-minute drill. What are you doing here? The ball just went out of bounds. Again, all the things that you would do with film that aren't as impactful when it's film. Now we can put them experientially in that mental state of actually being on the field, and the player is, in theory, we're going to get a more realistic way of how they would react. That's kind of what we're going for here.
So just quickly, could you give a few examples of what a quarterback specifically could do, or what you could evaluate using this?
For draft prospects, is that what you're referring to? Yeah. I think, and again, I'm not going to speak for every team in the NFL as to how they do things, but I even saw this in college when I was a college coach, and we would recruit high school players. You're putting X's and O concepts up on the board. You're teaching them fundamentals about your offense, and then you're going to the tape and saying, okay, what would you do in this situation, right? So we're not changing that necessarily. We go through that X's and O exercise, and then we say, here, put this thing on, and tell me what you would do now. We literally put you in the huddle. You mentioned Dak Prescott in Dallas. We literally put you in the huddle next to, or as if you were Dak Prescott. You're hearing the play call. You're clapping your hands. You're coming up to the line of scrimmage. We can pause it and say, all right, identify the mic, right? I mean, you got to go through all the mental mechanics of what you would do, just like you were either on the field or watching film. And the beauty of what we can do with VR is we can actually mirror that image that's in the headset up to the television screen. So the coach can see exactly where you're looking around, and he could say, why are you looking to the right when you should be looking to the left? You can't do that with film, right? Even on the field, nobody really knows where anyone's looking half the time. With this, we actually can do it. So that's just one example. No different than a linebacker, a corner, a safety. Kind of all depends on how the team is chosen to build that library and what's available to the team.
This is very interesting stuff, Derek. I appreciate you educating us more on STRIVR Labs. Thanks so much for talking with us today.
Happy to help anytime. Thank you, Michaela. I appreciate it.